The tragic truth about Celine Dion. The deadly silence. What price did the woman with the purest voice on the planet pay? Behind every idol lies a secret. Behind every anthem, a sacrifice. For decades, the world has revered Celine Dion, not just as a singer, but as the embodiment of vocal perfection. The woman who turned cinematic drama into pure gold. But if you look closer, beyond the Las Vegas spotlights and haute couture gowns, you'll find a persistent shadow. Her life, far from the fairy tale she sang about, has been an odyssey of brutal losses, secret battles, and an imposed destiny. How could an artist with a multi-billion-dollar fortune, adored by millions, become the epitome of loneliness and tragedy? The truth is, Celine Dion is the protagonist of a noir novel disguised as a pop opera. Her rise wasn't by grace, but by an unbreakable pact that demanded a total surrender of her identity. She became a ballad-making machine, her performance tied to a relationship that began amidst controversy. The universe, it seems, has exacted immeasurable pain from her, from the poverty of her childhood through the complete loss of her autonomy to the devastating series of deaths of her loved ones. Now, with her voice threatened by the mysterious and cruel rigid personality syndrome, we are forced to ask ourselves, was this illness the result of a life of vocal strain and relentless demands? This is the chronicle of the price one of the greatest voices in history has had to pay, and relentless origins and the encounter that sealed her fate. 1968. The Slums. Misery and the birth of a musical martyr. The story begins in utter austerity. Charlemagne, Quebec wasn't exactly a breeding ground for stars, but a humble Canadian town where Celine Marie Claudette Dion was born on March 30th, 1968. She was the youngest of 14 children, a detail that immediately paints a picture of scarcity. Her house wasn't a home, but a chaotic refuge where money was tight, but the music never stopped. Celine herself has described her early years as a whirlwind of love and hardship. The Dion family, led by Adamar and Therese, was a traveling orchestra, earning a living touring Canada. This environment taught her that music wasn't an art form, but a tool for survival. Fate placed her on the stage of the family piano bar at the precocious age of 5. The anecdote, now part of local folklore, tells of how customers were mesmerized by the voice of a little girl who seemed to have been touched by something divine. Contemporary reflections on her, the child prodigy, often ignored the sacrifice. How normal can a childhood spent performing for tips in a bar really be? The beginning of the scandal, Angelil's sacrifice, and the audacious contract. The true turning point came in 1980. The cassette tape sent to manager René Angelil, a man 26 years her senior, at the age of 38, contained the voice of a 12-year-old girl. Angelil's response wasn't professional but visceral. It said he wept upon hearing her, an act that, to the cynics of the industry, always seemed overly dramatic. But what followed was a financial risk that transcended mere artistic admiration. In 1981, Angelil, under the spell of his new muse, mortgaged his own house. This wasn't just a loan, it was a life-or-death gamble to finance her first album, La Voix du Bon Dieu. This sacrifice, publicized as the ultimate test of faith, laid the foundation for the great myth of their relationship. That Celine, owing her career to René, was irrevocably bound to him. The public couldn't help but notice the intensity of the bond between a manager who acted as a father figure and a teenager whose entire life revolved around his vision. This rumor, although tempered by the eventual love affair, always left its mark. Was Celine's success a work of art or the result of absolute control from the start? The first triumph in exile. A star is born, a soul is lost. By the late 1980s, Celine was already a sensation in the French-speaking world, crowned by her victory at Eurovision 1988. But René's target was never just Quebec. It was the world. The invasion of the Anglo-Saxon market, however, demanded a painful deconstruction of the young star. Public judgment was harsh. To conquer the United States, Celine had to sacrifice her cultural identity. 18 months of seclusion saw her not only perfect her English and manners, but even undergo dental work to correct her appearance. It was the social engineering of a diva. The bitter reflections of the Canadian media at the time revolved around the selling of her soul. "We've lost our Celine to the Hollywood machine," they commented. The humble girl was replaced by a glossy product, a harbinger of the tragedy of personal autonomy that was to come. Second, the promise of fame and the exploitation of talent, late 80s, 1997. The perfect armor, the punishment of forced transformation. With the release of her English-language album, Unison, in 1990, Celine presented herself to the world as a polished, almost artificial star. The narrative tone of the American dream sold the story of overcoming adversity, but the reality was that of an artist who had been forced to erase her origins to fit the mold. Angelil's team left nothing to chance, creating an image so immaculate that it came across as cold to some. Public opinion at the time was often divided. While the United States celebrated her as a vocal prodigy, some European critics wondered if such perfection wasn't, in fact, a flaw. Celine's personal reflections years later would reveal the pressure of this makeover. "I couldn't do anything without René's approval. I felt safe, but also controlled. It was the price of a global success that, in reality, belonged to another man's vision." The imposed silence, when the gift becomes a threat. Fate, however, had its own plan of revenge. At the height of her rise, before embarking on her first major American tour, Celine's body sent a catastrophic warning signal. Due to the brutal demands of recording and promotion, she suffered severe inflammation of her vocal cords. The diagnosis was an act of cruelty for a singer: absolute silence or permanent damage. For weeks, Celine, the voice of a generation, couldn't utter a single sound. This was no simple cold. It was a professional trauma that cemented fear in her life. The press echoed the panic at Angelil's camp, speculating about millions of dollars lost. The mythology grew. It was said that Angelil had imposed a Spartan regime of vocal care, becoming paranoid about any possible relapse. It was the first time Celine faced the terrifying truth. Her gift, her only weapon, was her greatest weakness. The blood of the Titanic, the anthem she didn't want to sing. The climax of this period arrives with the song that defines her legacy, "My Heart Will Go On," 1997. The myth behind its success isn't a story of inspiration, but of coercion. The tragic truth is that Celine hated the song. She didn't like the melody, didn't want to record it, and saw it as too commercial anthem. The industry rumor is that the only reason we have this masterpiece is because of René Angelil's obstinacy. He convinced her, forced her to record a test take under the promise that if she didn't like it, they could delete it. The world is a puppet world. The public saw her crying in the videos. What they didn't know was that the real anguish was that of a woman whose life and work were irreversibly dictated by another. Third fairy tale and curse. Forbidden love and the bloody battle for motherhood. 1987 to 2010. The forbidden romance. The mark of controversy. The love story of Celine Dion and René Angelil was not a casual infatuation. It was the inevitable culmination of a professional destiny. What began as the relationship between a devoted manager and his protégé transformed, under a veil of secrecy, into a romantic union when Celine turned 19. This 26-year age difference was not merely a biographical detail, but a moral burden that the couple bore with apprehension. For years, they lived their love as an act of subversion. The most potent and persistent rumor circulating in the tabloids was that Celine's own mother, Celine Dion, had vehemently disapproved of the relationship, considering Renee more of a manipulator than a lover. This initial disapproval, though later tempered, added a layer of familial pain to the already controversial romance. Public opinion was divided. One faction applauded true love that defied convention, while another saw in the young Celine a victim of the industry's power dynamics, a woman who never had the chance to know another man. The lavish 1994 wedding, a nationally televised event in Canada, was Renee's attempt to legitimize their love before a global jury. It wasn't an intimate ceremony, but a coronation, a challenge. For Celine, it was the public acceptance of the role Renee had written for her. In her own reflections, she would always defend him as the only man who knew her soul, but the shadow of dependency always loomed over her happiness. The bloody price of motherhood, the intimate war. Just as her voice was at its peak, Celine's life was interrupted by her first major personal crisis, Renee's throat cancer diagnosis in 1999. The world watched the diva withdraw from public life, which the press interpreted as the greatest sacrifice ever made by a pop star at the height of her powers. Celine became a shadow, a devoted caregiver, as her musical empire ground to a halt. Once the initial illness was overcome, the couple faced a far more intimate and heartbreaking challenge: infertility. For a woman who had dominated the world stage, the inability to conceive naturally was a silent and private humiliation. Celine underwent the grueling routine of in vitro fertilization, a process that took a devastating physical and emotional toll. The struggle for their children was a true agony. The birth of Renee Charles in 2001 was hailed as a miracle, but it was preceded by years of injections, frustrating waits, and setbacks. The mythology of suffering intensified with the birth of twins, Eddie and Nelson, in 2010. It took 6 rounds of IVF to conceive them. This was not an easy celebration. It was the culmination of a painful effort, a testament to Celine's willingness to pay any physical price, even at the cost of her own body and peace of mind, to achieve motherhood. The pure voice that sang of love was being worn down in the most intimate biological struggle. Las Vegas, the gilded cage, and absolute control. In 2003, Celine Dion made a decision that revolutionized the entertainment industry: a permanent residency in Las Vegas. The show, A New Day, was a massive success. But the most cynical interpretation of the move is that it wasn't an artistic choice, but rather a measure of control by Angelil. Las Vegas offered a stable, predictable, and highly lucrative environment, allowing Renee, always aware of the threat of her illness, to keep Celine close to home and under constant supervision. It was the perfect, gilded cage. She sold the idea of family stability, but the reality was that of an artist whose touring autonomy had been eliminated. The public applauded the discipline, while Celine herself, according to unconfirmed rumors, felt the monotony of repeating the same show night after night. A metaphor for a life where every move was dictated by men who had created it. This period solidified Celine's image as the most meticulously choreographed woman in music. Third, the bloody price of fame, the string of losses, and the descent into obscurity, 2014 to 2020. The Last Wish, the forced return to the stage. The peace of Las Vegas was definitively shattered in 2013 with the merciless recurrence of Renee's cancer. This time, the disease would offer no respite. Celine retired again in 2014 to care for him. A gesture of love she had already made once, but which was now tinged with the imminence of tragedy. The final act of devotion was the most heartbreaking. Renee, knowing his fatal destiny, begged Celine to return to the stage while he was still alive. He wanted to see her triumph until his last breath. Celine obeyed, returning to the spotlight with a broken heart. Celine obeyed, returning to the spotlight with a broken heart. She wasn't singing for the public, but for a dying man in the shadows, carrying the weight of impending loss in every high note. To the public, she was the tragic heroine. To herself, she was fulfilling a painful duty. This reflection marked her subsequent interviews. Music became an act of love and suffering in equal measure. The cruel January of 2016, the double death sentence. Fate, which seemed to have it in for her, reserved its cruelest moment for her at the beginning of 2016. On January 14th, René Angelil breathed his last. The loss was cataclysmic. René was her husband, manager, mentor, and father figure, a void that would leave her adrift in an ocean of responsibilities. The image of Celine, stoic at the state funeral, was admired globally, but her extreme thinness and pallor told a story of utter exhaustion. The press, however, failed to process the cosmic atrocity that occurred just 2 days later. On January 16th, Daniel Dion, her brother, also died, a victim of another cancer. This double blow is the darkest chapter of her biography. The public was shocked by the magnitude of the injustice. Rumors spoke of a woman on the verge of collapse, forced to plan 2 funerals while navigating the deepest grief. The question on everyone's lips was, why so much sorrow concentrated on one person? Public fragility, physical decline. The years following 2016 were marked by loneliness and a physical transformation that became the subject of intense public speculation. Celine, once a robust and healthy figure, looked dangerously thin. Media commentary and gossip obsessively focused on her weight loss, speculating about eating disorders or severe depression. Celine tried to deny these rumors, attributing her thinness to the need to wear haute couture and the pressure of dance. However, in retrospect, the fragility of her appearance was the physical expression of a body beginning to fail under the strain. Her grief for René was profound, and the pressure of raising her twins and René Charles alone while managing a music empire was consuming her. The final bond broken, the departure of the matriarch. The chain of losses culminated in January 2020 with the death of her mother, Celine Dion, at 92. Celine was the last great emotional pillar of her childhood, the woman who had embodied her humble roots. With her passing, Celine was left completely alone at the head of her family, without the refuge of her mother or the control of her husband. This series of tragedies, father in 2003, before this period, husband, brother, mother, turned Celine's life into a biography of constant pain, the perfect prelude to the last and most merciless act of fate, the illness that, ironically, focused on the only treasure she had left, her voice. The period from 2014 to 2020 was the purging of all her protective ties, leaving her vulnerable to the darkness that was approaching. Fourth, the final curse. The silence imposed by fate and the biological struggle for the legacy. 2020, present. The empty throne, the solitary matriarch, and the control of the empire. After the brutal period of mourning from 2016 to 2020, Celine Dion emerged as the matriarch of a $550 million empire, 2024 figures. A public figure burdened with the immense responsibility of her 3 sons, but devoid of René's protective and controlling shield. Celine's single life immediately became a subject of media obsession. The tabloids speculated about possible romances and her love life, but Celine remained steadfast in her mourning, declaring that René would be the only man in her life. This period of apparent independence actually revealed a profound loneliness. Her energy was poured into her sons, René Charles, Eddie, and Nelson, protecting them from fame and prying eyes. The intimate reflections she leaked to the media portrayed her as a strong but devastated woman, whose greatest triumph now wasn't a Grammy, but keeping her children safe. The constant rumor in Las Vegas was the pressure on René Charles, her eldest son, whose physical resemblance to her father and foray into music as a rapper were seen by many as Celine's unconscious attempt to perpetuate the legacy that Renée Angelil had crafted. The silent suffering, the mystery of 17 years. The great tragedy that defines the final stage of Celine Dion's life didn't begin with a sudden diagnosis, but with an ordeal of silent suffering that stretched for almost 2 decades. In 2024, it was publicly revealed that Celine had battled a variety of mysterious and debilitating symptoms for 17 years before finally receiving an answer. This period of medical uncertainty is one of the most tragic and least known chapters of her life. While the public watched her dazzle on the Las Vegas stage or on world tours, breaking sales records and receiving awards like the Diamond at the 2004 World Music Awards, her body was sending warning signals that were ignored or misdiagnosed. It is said that the symptoms were mistaken for anxiety, muscle tension, or simple exhaustion, or by the demands of performance. This stark contradiction between the icon of perfection and the woman battling an invisible affliction intensifies the drama. She was forced to wear a mask of joy and vocal power, while internally she felt her muscles and her most prized instrument beginning to betray her. Public commentary at the time focused on her extreme thinness, as already mentioned, a visible sign of the internal struggle and chronic stress that, unbeknownst to her, were accelerating the illness. The final verdict: Stiff Person Syndrome, SPS. The search for answers finally ended in August 2022 with a diagnosis that was an act of cruelty. Stiff Person Syndrome, Steve Pearson Syndrome, SPS. SPS is an extremely rare and incurable autoimmune neurological disease. Its mechanism of action is merciless. It turns muscles to stone, causing progressive muscle rigidity, painful spasms, and, worst of all for a singer, directly affecting the vocal cords and respiratory muscles. The tragic impact was instantaneous and total. Celine's body, which had been her vehicle to fame and fortune, became her prison. The news of the diagnosis was revealed to the world with a heartbreaking video where Celine, with tears in her eyes, confessed her truth. The vulnerability of that moment contrasted sharply with decades of her powerful image. Public comments were a wave of sadness and compassion. People realized that fate had reserved the worst possible revenge for a woman who had sacrificed everything for her voice, to snatch away that very gift. The imposed silence, the fall of the touring empire. The immediate effect of the SPS diagnosis was the complete and irrevocable cancellation of the remaining dates of her Courage World Tour 2023 and 2024. This was not a simple postponement. It was the abrupt end of an era. The machine that Renée Angelil had built, based on discipline and perseverance, came to a complete halt. The rumor on the concert circuit was that the damage was far more extensive than publicly acknowledged. There was speculation about Celine's difficulty walking, the intensity of the spasms, and the real impact on the quality of her voice. For promoters and fans, the cancellation was a loss. For Celine, it was the final humiliation, the acknowledgement that her iron will could not win a biological battle, a biological struggle, the resistance of a warrior. Despite the sentence of her illness, Celine Dion has demonstrated the same tenacity that lifted her out of poverty. She has not given up. She has adopted the philosophy that if she can't sing, at least she can fight. Her commitment to rehabilitation is total. Reports from 2024 revealed that Celine is under the care of Dr. Amanda Piquet, an autoimmune neurology specialist at the University of Colorado. Her struggle has become a full-time job, a Spartan discipline, with daily sessions of vocal, physical, and body therapy. She herself has described it in her recent reflections. "I am training hard like an athlete." This heroic effort, filmed in part for the documentary I Am Celine Dion, is the ultimate tragic narrative. The star who had it all must now submit to the grueling task of rebuilding her voice from scratch, hoping for an unlikely comeback. Epilogue: The legacy of sacrifice and the final question. The saga of Celine Dion, that voice destined to sing immortal anthems, culminates in an almost unbearable paradox. Look at her, one of the wealthiest women in the industry, with a personal fortune exceeding $550 million. Owner of opulent mansions she has bought and sold over the years, from her home on Jupiter Island to her Las Vegas residence. The lack of fame and wealth, precisely the global destiny her manager, Renee Angelil, had planned for her. The agreement, the pact with her precious gift, her vocal talent, has been cruelly snatched away. Her own body, that instrument of unparalleled power, became a biological traitor. It is an ending worthy of a Greek tragedy. This is the final tragic truth behind the brilliance of Celine Dion. She stands as the icon of extreme sacrifice, a woman who paid an incalculable price, not only with her youth and independence, but with her very health, for every moment of glory. Her life has been a testament to forced success. He gave her all the gold in the world, but in return, he stripped her of control over her own life, devastated her with the loss of her family, and ultimately attacked the very instrument of her soul. Here we are, at the end of this road, with a heartbreaking question hanging in the air. The only hope that comforts us now is the possibility of a miracle. Can her will, as strong and tenacious as that of the man who controlled and loved her, be powerful enough to force one last act of redemption? Will she be able to break the curse and make her voice, rebuilt from the ashes, sing again, giving us the final chapter we all long for? Only time will tell.